I came a long journey to be here to speak to you today. And I think a lot of you in this room had a long journey to be here today. I live on a farm in Canada. It's beautiful there. It's the weather and it's a little bit like here in that it's cold and snowy in the winter, but it's rolling hills. That's my farm, that's my garden. And my wife's tractor. And, oh, I ain't kidding, she does all the physical work. She's the guy in the relationship, I'm the sissy. We've raised 5 children on the farm. And about 20 years ago, my daughter Kate, who was 13 at the time, came to me and said, "Daddy, they've opened an aromatherapy store in the village. Will you drive me there so I can see it?" And whilst Kate was looking around the store, I got talking to the owner of the store. Her name was Sandy. And whilst Kate was looking around, Sandy said to me that she'd given up her job, her big career in the city in Toronto, to work on a project which was her passion, which was aromatherapy. And I said, "Well, you know, it's funny you should say that, Sandy, because I'm thinking about getting out of photography because in 20, 25 years, I've met so many people with incredible potential, unbelievable potential, but no people skills. They're kind of like a rose with a rubber band around it, and they will never blossom until someone takes the rubber band off." I said, I'm not going to stop talking about it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get out of photography, and I'm going to start doing that. I said, because we live in a world where millions of introverts are forced to masquerade as extroverts to make a living, and it doesn't always come easy. We live in a world where millions of children are being raised by parents who have no people skills. What's to become of kids whose parents have got no people skills? We live in a world where we're told we should be leaders, and yet we live in a culture of blame. Look at the headlines, listen to the news. Someone's always blaming somebody else. You cannot be a leader if the word blame is in your vocabulary, because it means you have external locus of control. If you have internal locus of control, which I hope you all have, it means you take full responsibility for everything you do, which means that you can learn by your mistakes. Most people have external locus of control, which means they blame other people for stuff. Oh, it was the politicians, it was the doctors, it was the traffic. I'm late because of the weather. No, you're not. You're late because you didn't plan properly. But you... And we live in a world where we are brought up to avoid taking risks, and yet by taking risks is the only way we can grow. We are either growing or you're going in this life. It's growth or decay. It's the second law of thermodynamics. And so I'm telling all this to Sandy. And she said, "Well, I think that's great. That's a great project." She said, "But what's your gift?" Maybe it's that I can make complicated things sound simple and interesting. She said, "Fine, that's your gift." A week and a half later, I get a phone call from Sandy. She said, "I'm having some people around to my house to talk about aromatherapy. Would you like to come and talk about your project, what you're doing?" I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." So I went round to her house and I spoke to the little group of people there. 4 days later, I get a phone call from a woman saying, "I was at Sandy's house the other night. I heard you talk. I'm part of a women's networking group in the region there, and we meet the first Tuesday of every month in the restaurant, and would you like to come and talk to the group?" I said, "Yeah." I went and spoke to the group. A couple of weeks later, I get a phone call from a guy saying, "My cousin was at that women's networking group. I have 200 real estate agents in the region. Could you put on a workshop for them?" Yeah. And so I went and I did it. Exactly 7 weeks later, I get a phone call from a company that said, "We're the staging company for AT&T Canada. We've been following you. We'd like to invite you to be the kickoff speaker at the national convention for AT&T Canada at the Metro Convention Centre in Toronto to speak to 1,600 people." So I went and I did it, and it set my career on fire. Before long, I was in New York getting a book deal and getting on the TV, and my book started to go everywhere. Moral of the story: never turn down an invitation from your 13-year-old daughter to visit an aromatherapy store that's just opened in your local village, because opportunities are everywhere, but you have to go out and find them. But when people, purpose, projects, and passion come together, Fear and doubt go out the window. Opportunities and lucky breaks come through the front door, and your potential goes through the roof. Because the magic of talking to strangers is you never know who you're talking to. I'm sure, so that was my journey here today. That was a long journey. And I have to tell you, because people say, well, I want to hear about the tough times. I just want you to know, it isn't all lucky, but there are sleepless nights and there are bills to be paid. But you know what? I wasn't giving up. And I went on and on and on and on until I got an offer to go to New York, to Workman Publishing in New York, met Peter Workman at Workman Publishing, and left with a 6-figure advance. Well over $100,000 in my hands. So you keep at it, and it works. And I know you've all had the same, well, I'm joking when I say you have a long journey here today. You've all been through it since you were kids to get here today, and you've met strangers along the way, and you've talked to strangers along the way. Because life doesn't happen without talking to strangers. Whatever it is you want in this life, whether it's a fantastic education, whether it's a fantastic job, whether it's tickets to the FA Cup, chances are you'll need to talk to a stranger to get them. You'll need a stranger's help to get them. And if you can understand that, you can understand one of life's greatest, simplest truths. Life doesn't happen without talking to strangers. Nothing happens without talking to strangers. So, who are these strangers? Well, I've interviewed more than 3,000 people to write my books. My books are not based on what Nick thinks. My books are based on Nick going out, interviewing people, and finding their strategies. So I've altogether, to write my 3 books, which are all basically about talking to strangers and the words to use, and I found it much easier to divide these strangers into these 5 categories. It makes it much easier to talk to them. And if you're going to start talking to strangers and you're a little bit nervous about it, well, first of all, we have familiar strangers. So these are opportunities that you can immediately start talking to. And this includes the people who sit next to you on the train, on the bus, on the plane, or even here. If you're sitting next to a stranger, here's a tip. When you sit down on a plane or on a bus or somewhere like here where you're sitting next to a stranger, just say something as you sit down. Say good morning or hi or excuse me or I'm going to sit. Say anything because you've actually broken the ice. Then if you want to talk to them again or say something later, you've already spoken to them once. And the ice is broken. So how do we talk to, well, familiar strangers? The best way to talk to anybody, and it gets easier as you get older, is what I call assuming rapport. You just assume you know the person. I was in an art gallery the other day, and I'm just standing looking at something, and a woman comes and stands next to me. She's actually synchronized my body language, and she just said, "Nice, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, it is nice." And we just talking like we're cousins or something. That's the best way, is to practice assuming rapport with people.